Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you are here to learn more about the Civic 50 and the opportunity to participate in the 2024 survey. My name is Katie Stearns, and I am the Chief Global Corporate Solutions Officer at Points of Light. And Points of Light is on a mission to inspire, equip, and mobilize people to take action that changes the world. And we do that work with individuals, with NGOs around the globe, and with companies. We really believe that companies have an essential role to play in solving community problems and connecting their employees to civic engagement. And I am guessing by the fact that you are here today that you probably agree with that. The Civic 50 is just one of the ways that we work with companies. We also support corporate social impact through the Points of Light Corporate Service Council, through our annual conference, which is coming up in Houston in June, through consulting and advisory services, and also through our large-scale employee activations. But today we are focused on the Civic 50. And what's so important about the Civic 50 that you'll hear more about is that the program is both recognition and roadmap. It is a badge of honor, a national standard really for our honoree companies each year. And it's also an insightful self-assessment tool that can help you plan for your company's next steps, whether your civic engagement programs are 1 or 100 years old. Before we jump into telling you more about the Civic 50 survey and methodology and talking with our great guest speaker, I want to first acknowledge the Civic 50 2023 honorees. As you can see, this is truly a diverse group of companies in size, in industry, and in impact. But what they have in common is their deep commitment to community and civic engagement. And we were so pleased to be able to recognize them at the 2023 Points of Light conference. So here's a look at that video.
Conversations about social change and activism might conjure images of nonprofits or teams of volunteers. But Points of Light sees another ally in its pursuit of transformative social change: corporations. Growing social consciousness isn't just a Gen Z thing. Companies from all industries are increasingly recognizing their role and responsibility in driving real and sustained community change. They have the name and the might to accelerate social impact and equip their employees to take positive action. We began recognizing the Civic 50 in 2012. Each year, we honor an impressive list of the top American companies leveraging their time, talent, and resources to help tackle society's greatest challenges so that we can build stronger, more vibrant communities. Building on the Points of Light Civic Circle, the Civic 50 led the way in showing their corporate peers how to activate the many ways employees and companies can make meaningful contributions, while moving civic and community engagement to the core of their business. This year's Civic 50 honorees raised the bar for what it means to be a good corporate citizen through their significant support for causes and communities across the country. This year's honorees empower more than 400,000 employees who volunteer more than 6 million hours in their communities. Additionally, our honorees give more than $1.7 billion in financial resources and more than $9.8 billion in in-kind donations of goods and services in support of nonprofit organizations. Join us in congratulating the Civic 50 of 2023.
We love to tell the story of our Civic 50 honorees. And so I just want to hit some of the incredible facts about what those 2023 honorees accomplished. You heard in the video that they empowered more than 400,000 employees to volunteer more than 6 million hours in their community. They also donated more than twice what most US companies do in cash and in-kind contributions. And on average, they engaged 31% of employees in external volunteering, which is compared to 17% for most US companies overall. So it's truly an impressive group. And we want to tell you how your company can be in the mix for this year's Civic 50. So I'll hand things over to Jeff Ader, Points of Light's Senior Director of Corporate Insights and Programs.
Wonderful. Thanks, Katie. So I'm going to give kind of just a run through of the Civic 50 and then get into the benefits of participating and how we can help your company submit an application and leverage the benefits of the program. So as referenced in the video, Points of Light started the Civic 50 in 2012, really as a way to help companies better understand and evaluate their corporate social impact work, to identify best practices and opportunities for strengthening and scaling their CSR programs, and lastly, to equip them with the benchmarking data and insights to better showcase their impact and program successes. And so, as you can imagine, while the scope and sophistication of CSR professionals' work has evolved since it was launched more than a decade ago, we believe the survey framework that it's based on with these 4 focus areas remains both relevant and useful for companies, and like Katie mentioned, really serves as a roadmap for driving greater community and business impact. So let's walk through these four focus areas. So first is investment. And this is really looking at how your company strategically invests its resources in community engagement and social impact programs. So this includes everything from employee time and skills through volunteerism, financial contributions, as well as in-kind giving with goods and services. So the second focus area is integration. And this is really looking at how your company integrates its community engagement and social impact programs throughout the rest of the business. So how does your CSR work show up in other departments, and how formal and broadly kind of implemented is that integration? Similar to integration, institutionalization looks at how your company incorporates its community engagement and priorities in organizational policies, systems, KPIs, even employee incentives. And then lastly is impact. And here we're not looking at which company has the largest impact, but really your company's approach to measuring impact, and really trying to move beyond simply tracking kind of inputs and outputs to really getting at those longer term outcomes and impact. So the online survey is divided into these 4 sections, and all of the questions are either quantitative or multiple choice. Fair and Levy with True Impact will walk through this more later, but all of the responses to these questions are normalized based on company revenues and the number of employees as part of the scoring process. And we always like to remind companies, especially those that may be new, and this might be your first time participating, that there's no human kind of judging that's part of the process, and we only make the top 50 companies public. So if your company participates and leverages all the great benchmarking insights, but doesn't make the top 50 list, we do not make those companies' names public. So next, I kind of want to walk through how we're seeing companies benefit from participating in the Civic 50. First and foremost, our CSR teams. And what many have shared is that not only is the survey framework and the benchmarking data helpful for evaluating their programs, but actually the process of engaging other departments and stakeholders to complete the survey has been incredibly valuable in helping many kind of just open up those conversations and build those connections as they integrate their social impact work throughout their company. Next are senior executives. More and more, we are seeing senior leaders, even the CEOs, leveraging their honoree designation really as kind of a concise and compelling way to communicate their company's values and deep commitment to doing good. It's fun. Every year we see more transcripts even coming where companies and the executives have highlighted the Civic 50 recognition on their investor calls and quarterly earning calls, which I think is a testament to CSR being valued at that C-suite level for the honorees. This kind of external validation and recognition also proves of great value to marketing and PR teams, both in recognizing the company's commitment to community, but also really serving as a platform for storytelling and showcasing their social impact programs throughout the year. Throughout the year, we continue to see teams using this in all forms of external communications, from press releases and boilerplates in press releases to CSR and ESG reports, emails to customers, even email signatures having the honoree badge. And lastly, and I think maybe most important, are the employees. It's no surprise that they are really kind of the driving force behind a company's social impact work. And the Civic 50 really gives them an opportunity both to kind of better understand and celebrate how their work contributes to their company's broader positive social impact. So I want to share a few key dates and really how we can help your company participate. So we'll drop a link in the chat to the applicant information page that will have all of this information as well as the recording and slides from today's webinar. So the survey is now open. You can access it from the applicant information page, and it will close on March 14th. We will then notify companies in mid-April about their notification, the status of whether they made the top 50 or not, as well as share their benchmarking scorecard reports that Farron will walk through a bit later in this presentation. We'll also share some key insights as we make the kind of big public reveal on May 14th. Which it will have all 50 companies making their internal and external announcements on the same day, which is a great way to both recognize those companies and also elevate kind of the work in the sector and how important it's become. And then lastly, in the summer, we'll release our annual Key Trends and Insights reports that has a wealth of benchmarking and insights from the honorees, as well as some best practices as well. So the applicant information page, which we've dropped a link to in the chat, has a link to start the survey, as well as other resources that may be helpful to your company. So we've included a downloadable document that has all of the survey questions that many companies use to capture their data before submitting it online. It has FAQs and instructions for how to complete the survey. A whole lot of information is there, but we'll also drop a link in the chat to our support email. Our team is standing by to assist your team once you start, and if you may be a new company and thinking through whether or not your company should participate, we're happy to set up a time to talk that through. So with that, I'm now excited to welcome on camera and introduce Farron Levy, founder and CEO of True Impact, and I'm sure no stranger to many of our attendees today. True Impact, which helps companies and their nonprofit partners measure the impact of their employee and community engagement work, has been a part of the Civic 50 since Points of Light launched it more than a decade ago, and we value the continued partnership and really the expertise that they bring to the sector. So we are thrilled to have you with us today, Farron, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jeff, and welcome to everyone. We're excited for another year at the Civic 50. I am going to go pretty quickly through the methodology. If we can go to the next slide. It's pretty straightforward, and that's by design. Everything is equal in the survey. There are 4 different dimensions, and each question is weighted equally. So you have a clear sense. Katie had talked at the top of the presentation about this being a roadmap, and that's what it's really designed in the scoring to be, that roadmap, so you can figure out where you're doing well, where are the opportunities to do better, and so on. So each of the dimensions are worth 1,000 points, and each of the questions are weighted. Sorry, can you hear me okay? It's getting a little feedback.
We can.
Okay. Sorry. So the all the quantitative, the drop down, and multi-select questions, as you can see, they're weighted by, if you put in a quantitative number, your entry is weighted against all the other companies that are participating. So if you're among the top 20%, you'll get 100% of the points. The next 20%, you'll get 75% of the points, and so on. So it doles it out by quintiles. With the drop downs, it's the same approach. So with a drop down, you get the top option is, and an answer option is worth 100% of the points. The next option, 75, 50, 25%, and so on. And then the multi-select's pretty similar. If you get a question that has 5 different options, it's the same structure, or 10 different options. If you select all of them, you'll get 100% of the points. If you select whatever proportion of those is being relevant to your program, you'll get an equivalent proportion of the points. And one thing to note, every company goes through, and some of them you'll do really well on with the questions, and others, for no kind of fault of your own, you won't have an opportunity to kind of do well in that option. It might be due to your industry, or your corporate culture, or your role. You might not have influence on improving in that certain area. And that's okay. Every company runs into that. So our general counsel here is to kind of go through and accept the fact that some of them you're not going to do great on, but others you will have some opportunity to influence over time and to report on and improve on. So that's the methodology. Next slide. Everyone who participates in the Civic 50 will get a free scorecard at the end of it. And so that outlined in green, you'll see your score, your result on each of the dimensions, and your ranking against all the other participating companies. And it will break out by tier: top 10%, top 25, top 50, lower 25, and bottom 25. And that everything above 50% will get kind of a medal, gold, silver, and bronze. And of course, the top 50 score getters will make the Civic 50 and will be publicly celebrated. The idea here with this scorecard and the other, there are more detailed scorecards that you can buy. The sector scorecard and the comprehensive scorecard will do those calculations, the score calculations, the rankings, and the comparisons by question and against other companies in your industry. The whole idea is to just give you more opportunity to celebrate areas where you've done really well and identify those opportunities to do better, again, with that roadmap concept. Next slide. And in terms of using the data, we always talk about generally that with the Civic 50 overall, it's about in a similar way that kind of measurement more generally, it's a way to demonstrate when you're doing well, prove your value, and also identify opportunities to improve value. And so here are just a few examples of how you can use your Civic 50 results to demonstrate the value of your program. So in this table, a few examples, the comparisons, you can always think about how you're doing as compared to all the companies participating overall, or versus your industry, or absent that, even your past performance. So you can see as you go through in these examples, your external volunteerism rate might be 41%, And compared to others in your industry, you're in the top 10%. Maybe it's not as performant as compared to companies overall, but this is just an opportunity to give you different perspectives to celebrate when there are kind of legitimate, concrete ways that you are performing well and you can celebrate. Hours per volunteer. Hey, we're doing top 20 for 25% against all the companies in the Civic 50. Or absent that, even if you're not performing as well against peers, your own baseline, improvement against your own baseline is really at the end of the day, what we're hoping for. We're hoping for more and more effective civic engagement. So even if you start at a low baseline that relative to other companies is not as strong. If you are progressing year over year, that's a really powerful statement. And to be able to say that, we've improved 25 or 50% compared to what we've done previously is a really powerful proof point on your overall performance. That's proving value, and just kind of keep that in mind as you're going into this, and be thinking about what you can be, the stories you can be telling as you're filling out your Civic 50 report, because we really want you to get the most out of this as possible. The next slide gets into improving value, and it's kind of the flip side of this. So if there are areas where you'll identify and celebrate those areas where you are doing very well, but then there are always going to be those areas where you feel like there are some opportunities for improvement. I started off by noting that some of those areas you won't have an opportunity, or you won't be in a position to really move the needle on those areas. Maybe you don't have influence to make civic engagement a part of company-wide staff reviews or something like that, where it's not something you feel like you could lobby executive leadership for. And that's fine. Just identify that as not something that's really practical to move. But there will be other opportunities where you can have influence. And looking at those, maybe looking at peers, particularly if you're kind of at a lower rate, then other companies have achieved certain heights, and lots of companies over the decade that we've been doing it have used other companies' performance as not only inspiration but validation that it can be done. And just by borrowing some of those best practices that will be in the Points of Light reports, can give you guidance on how you can improve your performance over time, and to be able to demonstrate that is a really compelling proof point, both internally and externally. So that covers that's the methodology and some ideas on how to use the data. If you have any questions, feel free to post it in the chat, and otherwise I'll share this back with Katie.
Thanks, Farron. Appreciate you walking us through that, and really all of the ways that the Civic 50 survey and results can be used, which can be so powerful for companies. So we want to turn now to bringing those ways that the Civic 50 can be used to life a little bit more. So I am excited to invite our guest speaker, Balaji Ganapathy from Tata Consultancy Services, or TCS, to join me on screen. Balaji serves as the Chief Social Responsibility Officer for TCS, which, in case you don't know, is a global information technology company with 28 billion in annual revenues and more than 600,000 employees across 55 countries. A big job. And his mission is to harness the power of purpose, people, and technology in order to advance access, equity, and inclusion across society. TCS is a 7-time Civic 50 honoree, and they are one of our 2023 honorees. So I'm excited that Balaji is here to share more about their work and why TCS participates in the Civic 50. So Balaji, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Katie, and the team at Points of Light. Such a pleasure to be here.
I'm excited to dig in, and we've got a lot of questions, so let's go for it. One of the defining commonalities that we see with the Civic 50 honorees over the years is how they have integrated social impact through all aspects of their company. And Jeff talked earlier about the integration dimension, but integrating social impact in order to really build a culture of service. I would love to hear about how TCS has been able to align corporate and social purpose to build an internal culture of service.
Thanks for asking that question. It's a very important foundational one, because why do you exist as an organization? And what does social purpose mean for you? I think it occupies a lot of importance in today's context, and we can come back and talk about that later. But we were founded as a purpose-driven organization. We are part of the Tata Group of companies, which was established in 1868, so over 155-year history. And even today, our majority shareholdership is with two philanthropic trusts. So which means that for every dollar in dividend that we create through our organization, more than 66% goes to charitable causes that support the poorest in need. So that sort of defines the whole purpose of why this conglomerate came into existence. And TCS, as a 55-year-old organization, follows the same ethos and value system. So our purpose is to build greater futures for, through innovation and collective knowledge. So we are a technology organization, we are a knowledge organization. So we use knowledge to say how to use digital technologies to transform solutions and problems for our customers. So applying that same lens to talent was our immediate focus, right? So how do you help employees harness the power of digital technologies to advance their own careers? And the same focus applies to communities as well. How do you create sustainable communities through the power of knowledge and innovation? So then the question becomes, how can you make a difference in the world today, right? And that is very much aligned to your core strengths as an organization. To me, having been a student in this space and a practitioner in this space in the last 20 plus years, it all boils down to creating economic opportunity. I believe that's the greatest equalizer. So how can you create economic opportunity through social impact? Then became the clarion call for us. And that led to aspirational vision and mission, where we said, our vision is to connect people to opportunities in the digital economy, right? So access to that digital economy opportunity. And what I mean by that, just for us to reflect, is we often look at the world as haves and have-nots, developing and developed countries. But really, that is not. When you look at individuals and communities, we are in shades of gray, right? There are 1 billion people in the world who are living under $2 a day income. For those individuals and communities, they may not have access to potable water, a place to stay. They don't know where their meal is going to come from. And even a slight improvement in economic outcomes is going to have a transformational impact on their lives. There are another 4 billion people who are in the $2 to $8 a day bracket, who have a little better life in terms of they have access to potable water, they may have a bicycle or some sort of transportation. They get 1 square meal at least a day, and depending on which part of this income spectrum they are in. So we are very conscious about understanding where the need is the highest and the resources are the least, and aligning our efforts so that we can live up to our social purpose, right? So that means focusing on women, youth, and marginalized groups around the world. So that's how the fabric of the ethos of the organization to the purpose of the organization, how it aligns to social impact, and how we view how that translates to work that we can do day in and day out around the world.
That's great, and it sounds like it has been part of the focus from the start, which is tremendous. I know that building a culture of service like that, building a culture of social impact, it takes time and it takes effort, particularly at a global company the size of TCS, right? 55 countries. So maybe you can tell us about a few of the programs that help advance those goals that you described, and how they empower employees to make an impact in communities.
Certainly, I think, see, we have learned, and which is why I love Civic 50 and the model that it is choose. We'll talk a little bit later, dig deeper into that. So to me, I think we have to have a point of view to say, if this were a business opportunity, creating social impact were a business opportunity, what would you do, right? So to me, we have always brought the 4C model into play, which is 4 forms of capital that comes together to create an impact. So intellectual capital, which is the wisdom of crowds, right? Work with all of your stakeholders to understand the problem and come up with solutions. Understand that communities and people who are closest to the problem often have good answers, but they may not have the capacity to implement solutions or build partnerships. So intellectual capital is all about wisdom of crowds and understanding how you interact to impact society and empower people. Then comes technology capital, which we have in abundance. This is what we do day in and day out for 2,000 of our customers across all industries, including governments and Fortune 100 companies. So how can we harness the power of technology to innovate at scale? Breakthrough innovation at scale is what we focus on there. Then comes human capital, which again we have in abundance, 600,000 employees, as you mentioned. How can we engage their time and talent, but also their passion and their skills to be part of that solution? And then financial capital, which is basically the monetary investments that we can make to create impact. And in order to bring this to life, we have created a purpose ecosystem where the people and communities are at the center of that ecosystem. So everything that we do is to serve them. Day in and day out, when we wake up in the morning, we ask ourselves this question: who's our customer? Who are we serving today? And the women, youth, and marginalized groups whom are our target population is why we exist, right? So the programs that we have created are well designed so that they address the needs of those people and communities where they are at. So whether it is addressing gender barriers to create social uplift for women in India who are highly marginalized, or to work with underrepresented minorities and under-resourced schools in America, or to work with the indigenous population in Australia, I think the core of what we do is then to say, let's collectively create programs that can create impact, right? So we have thematic areas. We believe that access to opportunity, for that to be tangible, it comes through literacy, it is through education, through direct employment opportunities, and entrepreneurship. So those are the pillars that we use then to define our programs. And then the next aspect of our purpose ecosystem is employee and business integration, which is basically how do we then harness the power of our employees. And we have created an employee volunteering program post-pandemic. We have had a thriving culture of service pre-pandemic, but post-pandemic, we created an employee volunteering program called HOPE, which is Hours of Purpose by Employees. And it has really galvanized the whole organization to come in support of all of these efforts, right? So just as an example, in the last 12 months, we have had about 6 million hours of volunteering happen across the world. And these are aligned to the projects that we have created across our programs, as well as against the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Then we look at how can we engage our business teams. So we have teams in financial services, in insurance, and banking, and telecommunication, logistics, retail, all these domains are there. How do we use that power to create financial inclusion for our communities, or address food insecurity, or bridge the technology gap? So we work with our business units to then bring them in as part of the solution to work in different parts of the world, right? And then we extend it to our customer audience because we believe in the power of collective, the power of partnerships. We alone cannot solve. Any one person here in the room or any organization represented here alone cannot solve a big problem, right? The kind of big bets that we are making, we need a collective approach. So we work with about 500 of our customers each year on common areas of interest, right? It could be going to a public school nearby and working to mentor students and provide resources, or it could be as big as creating employment opportunities by certifications, credentials, and providing deep resources to marginalized students, or creating entrepreneurship opportunities where healthcare, telehealth, or telelaw is the product that can bridge the gap between those in need versus what entrepreneurs can provide in far-flung remote areas. So, and then the final part of the purpose ecosystem is cross-sector efforts, right? Even though we do all of this, what does impact look like in the long term? How do communities sustain this? So thinking about how we can advocate for change, how we can create policies that can then stand the test of time and creates room for more research and innovation and funding. So that's the kind of approach that we take. So just to summarize then, we have programs that reach about 4 million individuals around the world at a very deep impact level. We engage about a third of our organization, so about 180 to 200,000 employees a year in these efforts. We have all of our business units across 40 countries that are participating in our efforts. We work with about 400 customers on joint partnerships, and we engage about 6,000 experts or so from a cross-sector perspective to contribute to these efforts. So that's how you sustain this whole ecosystem and perpetuate that culture.
That's incredible. I mean, those numbers are impressive. And I this concept of a purpose ecosystem especially resonates with me because it is so illustrative of the Civic 50 honoree companies. These are the companies that have built, probably not using those same words, but have very much built an integrated ecosystem around their purpose work. So that's awesome. You mentioned the focus on long-term impact. And I think one of the things that can be true for those of us that work in this social impact field is that much of our attention on a day-to-day basis, it gets eaten up by actually administering those programs, right? Measuring the shorter term outcomes. How many volunteers did I get to sign up for that thing? Or how many connections did we make? So how has your team at TCS been able to remain focused on the more important longer term outcomes of your programs?
It's an important question and one that we grapple with on an everyday basis. We're blessed to have a very talented social impact team. We're about 200 professionals across the world, and they come from all walks of life. So I often say they are more talented than myself. So the ability to use their wisdom and their know-how on how you work on impact has really moved the needle for us, right? Obviously, like every organization, we struggle with, okay, how to report data on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and make sure that it is tied up to our strategic intent, our vision and mission, the portfolio of thematic areas, and then programs within that, the geographies that we operate in, engaging all of the stakeholders. All of those are things I'm sure in different levels of maturity, every organization will deal with, right? But I think it is important. I would say this is no different from how you run your business. If you are a purposeful organization, you will focus on both the short term and the long term, right? And research shows that the average lifespan of a Fortune 500 company listed in the S&P used to be about 50 years in the 1950s. Today, the average lifespan of a company in the S&P is about 14 years, 1-4, which means that in our lifetimes, you're going to see companies become very successful, get listed, be recognized, and then die off. So the question is, how do you then move from that short-term existence to a long-term one? It is by being purposeful. It is by having a long-term impact as the focus, creating shareholder as well as stakeholder value in the long term. Very similar approach in the social impact space, right? You do need to look at what are the resources that you have available at your disposal. The only thing is I don't limit it itself to, okay, we invest about $100 million each year in community initiatives globally. A lot of that in the global south, right? That by itself is not going to take things too far, right? So that's just an input. The 200,000 employees or so who are volunteering, that's an input. The hours that they create is an output. But what kind of outcomes are we creating depends on the theory of change of which programs you are creating, which communities you are choosing to work with, and looking at it as a long-term bet, right? So you have to straddle between the short term and the long term. which is why I said I have very talented people who keep us honest in terms of short-term measures, while we go aspiring for, okay, what can we do in the long term? I'll give you one example to close. 2013 is sort of the formative year when, about 10 years ago, right? This formative year when we made a big bet in the North America geography to say, how do we impact STEM education in this country and in this geography? At that time, people used to, when you talked about STEM, people would say, are you talking about stem cells? Today, that's not existing anymore. It's common parlance. Everybody understands about STEM education and careers. So that's a positive outcome. It's a long-term outcome. We ourselves could not have created it. We've contributed to it. So there is a correlation. But then within that, if you look at the ecosystem and say, okay, students, educators, schools, and under-resourced communities, what is the impact that has happened? Our going in position was that at that time, 10 years ago, 14% of graduates in the computer science spaces were women. Okay, and we said, how do you make sure that you create a program which completely reverses this trend in terms of its diversity of mix? So our school education program, I'm happy to say today, out of the 150,000 or so students that we have impacted in this time, more than 50% are girls. 7% of graduates in the computer science space were from underrepresented minorities 10 years ago. Our program has 72% of participants coming from underrepresented backgrounds, right? So that shows that if you put your intent into a program, design it appropriately, allow it to run against those measures in the long term, while of course looking at what do you do in the short term to build effective partnerships, provide resources to support and measure those short-term outcomes, it does make a difference, right? So similarly, we have measures across all of our programs and it adds up. But I would say the dichotomy is something as a practitioner you have to live with.
Yeah, you have to get comfortable with that both and, right? And incredible things are possible when you do. Yeah, that's so true.
For sure.
So a key focus of the Civic 50 is the business impact that community engagement programs have, right? On a company's employees, on talent recruitment, on brand, and even on the bottom line. But particularly for C-suite leaders, it's no secret that at the end of the day, the business benefits matter. So how has TCS's tremendous work in the community impacted your business?
I think it is a very integral part of who we are, right? Our founder 155 years ago said that the community is not just any other stakeholder, but the very purpose of existence of the organization. So having that lineage does help, but it does matter to contextualize it in today's terms, right? In today's term, what does that mean? The important thing to understand, especially post-pandemic, the pandemic has really brought a lot more of focus and attention to the fact that unless you solve the inequities that exist in society, you are not going to succeed, whether it is as a community or a company or a country, right? So if you look at how a lot of organizations change their business models from being very much product-centric to purpose-centric, it follows from that, right? So in that kind of an era, I know there is a big backlash against ESG, and rightfully so. And there is a backlash against DE&I, and which we will come through. All of these are going on because exploring what it means to be an organization that does good and does well is going beyond rhetoric, right? Today, it is going into not just how many things you put your name against in terms of a brand, how many statements you made. So all of those talk the talk before you walk the walk kind of approaches are now becoming a thing of the past, especially with social media and scrutiny and all of that. So as a business leader in the C-suite, what I talk to my board about and my executive leadership is all about being authentic in terms of what stakeholder value means, right? If your community is a stakeholder and the most important stakeholder, why are we doing what we are doing and how are we creating an impact? And the serendipitous outcomes are very much there. The purpose ecosystem that I talked about is the very way in which you are engaging your stakeholders. So if you're working with cross-sector organizations, obviously you're working with government, you're working with policymakers, you're working with civic organizations, and they see that your intent is authentic. You are here to make an impact. And that translates. Yes, you can measure it in terms of, okay, whom you're engaging with, what is their understanding of your organization, the reputation of your organization, how it is built, etc. Similarly, with the customers that we work with, they look at, okay, how as partners we are able to solve a problem. And many often where we as a company are not known that much in a community because we are a B2B organization, the partner's reputation is what is helping us. The customer's reputation is what is helping us open the doors to the community, say, this is a trusted partner, right? And once you start a relationship in that kind of a setting, business comes after that, right? And who do you want to work with? When I choose, or when as an organization we choose whom we want to work with organizations that are authentic, trustworthy, will be there for the long term, have a good set of values, and that gets demonstrated, right? And when you perpetuate that culture across business and employees by engaging them in this work, obviously the rest of it follows. I'm not saying that, okay, this is all kumbaya. There are measures to look at it in terms of, okay, how many people you're engaging, who's the audience, what are you, but it doesn't have to be only offset or reported against how much of marketing benefits you derive, how much of corporate affairs and public affairs benefits you derive. Those are necessary, but not sufficient. I think if you look at it in terms of authentically creating value, those other things will follow. Again, I'm not preaching kumbaya, but thoughtfully put it together. Ultimately, if you want to make a difference for the community and the people that you're serving, you can backtrack and look at, okay, which are the steps that enable that, who are the stakeholders that we can work with. And that's why, I mean, even today, any of my CMO or government affairs leader or business leaders, they always find time to talk about purpose work and social impact work because they authentically understand that it represents who we are as an organization.
And I think so important, thank you for sharing that. It's so important to remember that you're right, it's not kumbaya, it's not necessarily easy, but it's necessary. And if you can find that authentic value, which I think probably everyone on the line understands exists, the authentic value that social impact can bring to the bottom line and to the business, then you found your way through. So. Well, I mentioned earlier that TCS is a long-time Civic 50 honoree. You all have been on this list 7 times. You've been in this field for decades. So I would love to hear, as we wrap up, any advice that you have for companies that are considering participating in the Civic 50, and in particular, why the Civic 50 holds value for TCS and why you might encourage other companies to participate.
I think today in the call, I'm probably speaking to a coalition of the willing, right? We all sing from the same choir book. So I don't have to make the case as much of why you should be participating in the Civic 50, but I would still do that. I think when I started my journey in this space, I was very naive, okay? First few years, I was figuring out why do nonprofits have to spend money on anything outside of programming? Why administrative overheads and all these other areas? And once I started to mature and understand that, like any other good organization, it is important to have all elements right in place. Then the theory of how you make this happen, to me, there are very few institutions that have been steadfast in saying that this is not a hobby, this is a profession, and this is a space where impact is the ultimate product that you're creating. Community is the people that you're serving, the customers that you're serving. And the way to do that is to approach it in this manner, right? But it provides the space to say that the approaches that you adopt within the organization can be contextual to your need, but the framework is wide enough to be able to cater to that, but robust enough not to change from year to year to say, okay, you do this, you get this index, you do that, you get that award. That is what I love about the Civic 50, right? And the other thing is, I'll tell you that while I spoke a lot about our global efforts, we are about 40 years old in America, and 10 years ago when we started some of this journey in a bigger way, We were not known for the work that we do in this space at all. And to me, it was a big challenge that me and my team took, because around the world, Tatas are known for trust, for community. And here, there was no identity like that, even though we were doing work in the community. And I think the Civic 50 and a few other organizations, very handful, I would say in one hand, you can count the number of organizations that are reputable and have a process which is not pay to play, right? This is not something that you write up and create a lovely document around and then you get an award. This is very authentic, right? The assessment is very fair. The dimensions are applicable across industries. The questions and the sub points that you go through often remain the same, but also advances with time in keeping with what is happening in the world. I love that. And I think I proudly wear this on my sleeve that we are a Civic 50 company. Not only that we have been in the last 7 years continuously honored, but also we've been a sector leader for 5 years out of those 7 years. So it's a big badge of honor, because in the social impact space, like I said, there is very few reputable organizations that do this. The other, which I would also ask companies to consider, is that the ESG alphabet soup has become unpalatable today. Okay. So if you just go after these indices and awards, the nature of that can change from one to the next. And often you have, an analyst on the other end trying to tell you that, okay, we saw this article or we read here, and that is how we are determined who you are and how you should be called the most ethical or the most responsible company. There are good ones too. I'm not shying away from, there are good ones that you can apply to. But I think in the social impact space, which I think will become even more prominent, Europe has taken steps in this direction. In Asia, India, and South Africa already have taken steps in this direction many years ago. I think the measurement will start maturing. And I think companies that walk the walk already can use the Civic 50 framework as a yardstick to say, how do you measure against the best of the best? And one of the goals I always set for ourselves as a team is we have to stay within the 50 and on top, right? So it is not to get into it, but because the steps outlined are so much aligned to what you would anyway do to create impact. So I'm a big advocate behind the scenes. I know Diane is on the call. I mean, there's so many great people whom you have who have been associated with this. But ultimately, it is the framework, the robustness of the framework, and the flexibility it allows for pan-industry, pan-company practices to be measured in a similar manner.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, Balaji, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. A really great example
It's a pleasure.
of how this civic mindedness and this community engagement is coming to work. Keep up the great work at TCS. I'm sure you all will be taking the survey this year. And I want to hand it over to my colleague, Jeff, to wrap us up and make sure that everybody who's on the line knows how they can be part of the survey this year as well. Thanks again, Balaji.
Thank you so much, Katie and team.
Wonderful. Thank you both. So as we kind of wrap up and think about our own purpose ecosystem and network, I do want to encourage companies that there are more than ways to participate beyond the national survey. We have an excellent lineup of partners in 4 regional areas that run local Civic 50 programs. So in Greater Philadelphia, program run by the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia, Greater Triangle, Raleigh-Durham area run by Activate Good, Hampton Roads run by Volunteer Hampton Roads, and our partners in Orange County, which is run by 1OC. And highly encourage companies, if you have operations and employees in those regions, to participate. It's both a great recognition opportunity, but also a great way to connect with like-minded companies leading social impact work in those regions. So with that, in wrapping up, I'll just put this slide back up. Thank you all for attending and your interest in the Civic 50. All of this information, as I mentioned before, can be found on our applicant information page. And if you have any additional questions or just want to set up a time to discuss the survey and how we can help, feel free to send us an email at civic50@pointsoflight.org. Thank you all.